Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is here today with a very new concept. It is called a live stream. I have not done a live stream in 5 years. So this is a great pleasure to have these very talented hosts here on the show today. We are bringing together 8 of the best podcasters that I could find because they are technically awesome, amazing, and wonderful in their own rights. We have one guest, Andreas, who unfortunately couldn't make it here today. He has the show Ride With Me podcast. We'll get him on the next batch of these types of roundtable live stream sessions. But let's jump right into it. Let's start off with a quick introduction of everyone's show. I'm going to start with Mikey there at the very top since he's at the top.
Hey, Kurt, thanks for having me. Hey, everyone, my name is Mikey Kamuda. I host the Mikey on Mute podcast where I talk about my mental health journey and I talk to others about theirs so I can gain perspective, break some toxic masculinity stigma. Very new to the scene, so I'm very thankful to be joined by everyone here. So, again, Kurt, thanks for having me.
I'm Reena Friedman Watts, host of the Better Call Daddy show. I love to interview interesting and controversial people, share the stories with my dad, and then he weighs in with his intergenerational take. I interview daddy's girls, inspirational fathers, anybody with a good dad story, and I also just love collaborating with other creators. Thank you for putting this together, Kurt.
No problem. That was almost like herding cats for a second there.
Hi, my name is Jay. I'm the producer for the James Altucher shows, occasionally co-host, and I collaborated with Reena multiple times on, different ads and stuff. So my strong suit is producing like technical stuff, microphones, audio interface, anything audio. And then, I secretly record a bunch of my own stuff that, I'm just banking it up, 5 different ideas, and then when the time is right, I'm just gonna launch it, and then just hopefully it would take the world by the storm. Thank you.
Let's go with Barney there.
I get so excited. My name is Barney Smith. I host a podcast called Story Comic Presents, and I also have one called Vermont Artists and Authors, and I have another one called We Make Children's Books. I've been doing this for about 5 years, and as you can see by my background, I'm fully embracing my Gen X heritage. So this is the scene that I would always look at if I was homesick from school. I would always be watching that. The Price is Right. What was your other part of the question? Just introducing yourself?
Yeah, that was it.
Then I did it. I did it. There you go.
Bonus points. Love that. Izolda, let's go with you here.
Hi, everybody. Kurt, thank you for putting this together. I'm Izolda Trakhtenberg, and I host the Your Creative Mind podcast, where I take you behind the curtain of innovation, and together my best-selling author, Grammy and Tony Award-winning guests, entrepreneurs, and I break down the secrets of creativity, storytelling, and problem solving. And on the solo episodes, I show you how you can do it too.
And Jeff, last but not least, certainly not last but not least.
Hello, I'm Jeff Haas of the First and Stars podcast. In its 4th season, I interview the stars of film, television, music, and comic books. And you can find me on YouTube and Spotify and everywhere else.
Hey, short and sweet, that's the point of it, because we want to dive into these questions. We want to dive into the 8 topics and questions that we painstakingly put together for this particular live stream. Since Andreas isn't here, I'm going to steal I'm going to borrow his question just because it's a great icebreaker question. And the question is this: what made you come up with the topic of your podcast? Topic or name?
So I work for the James Altucher show. Obviously, my boss, James Altucher, came out with his own show name. But I usually come up with the topic. How we come up with the topic is because our show focuses so much on current event and educational and stuff like that. So I usually go to 5 or 6 different news websites, see what people are really talking about. If people are talking about something on X, doesn't mean they're talking about something on the social media. So we just look at generally what people are talking about then, and then not necessarily to route up their feelings or route everyone's feeling. It's so much, if we talk about the topic, what can we learn from the topic? If we want to talk about presidential elections, we usually weave in a lot of like the history that we can learn from, and hopefully our listener can learn from as well. And when I start a show of my own, I usually like entertainment plus educational, because I felt like that's the perfect intersections for a lot of people and listeners out there that's trying to find something new.
So Mikey on Mute is a podcast. I like the twist of the name because for so long I was on mute or silent about my mental health struggles, what's going on. I was raised not to talk about those things. And so I really just felt like I was on mute. So it kind of came to me just was a fun play because what podcasters on mute. So I thought that word was great. But the concept of the podcast started off selfishly to help myself. I wanted to video journal about my mental health struggles. Writing down things, it doesn't seem to work for me. It's great for people that do, but I wanted to kind of just voice it out. So I started recording the overview of my mental health journey, and it turns out that other people actually dug it. So that was pretty cool, and I have been able to meet a whole bunch of interesting characters that I get to talk to and try to really bring those conversations back to the forefront, make them less taboo.
I have kind of a strange story about this podcast's name and theme, and that is that it's evolved over time. And I guess if you're listening to this and you're struggling with what to start with, I encourage you to start. And if you want to change later, you can. My show started with Be Your Best Creative Self. Then it went to Tell Your Stories Better. Then it went to the Creative Mindset. Then it went to the Innovative Mindset. Then it went to the Creative Solutions Podcast. And then this January, I changed it to the Your Creative Mind Podcast because I keep trying to find exactly what I'm trying to talk about in the most sort of educational and entertaining way possible, as you said, Jay. But what's interesting about it to me is that as I hone in on it, my audience has come with me. Right. They have not said, oh, I don't want to listen to that. My numbers have actually only grown as I've evolved the show and evolved the title and evolved the theme. And so now, as I'm moving even more into the aspects of creativity that are both internal, subconscious, the building of mindfulness and awareness to be creative, all of that is fodder for me to talk about on the solo episodes, but it's also a lens through which my guests and I can look at how they do what they do and how they succeed in their chosen creative fields. And then we can sort of disseminate that information to the audience, and people really love that. They're really responding well. So the theme is sharpening, and finally, I think I've gotten to the point where your creative mind brings in the creativity, and it also brings in the real mindfulness and awareness aspects of things. So it allows me to take these two facets that are very in depth to who I am and bring them together in a way that I find is entertaining and is educational and informative and even inspiring to the people who are listening. And I actually have this little thing that I wanted to show right here. I don't know if you can read it. Oh, there it is. It's a little 3D printout that I got that says "Make Marvelous Mistakes." And if I could do it over again and start from the very beginning, that might be the name of the show, the Make Marvelous Mistakes podcast, because in looking at the way our minds work, in looking at creativity, this is what I've decided to do. And I encourage the people who listen to me to fail often, fail spectacularly, make those marvelous mistakes. And it lets us all be much more free to create the way we dream of creating.
I started off, so I got a degree in art, studio art, and I did what anyone normally would do with a degree in art in the late 90s with it. You join the Peace Corps, so that's what I did. So so I was in the Peace Corps for about 4 years. Then after that, I started working for Doctors Without Borders, and I was doing that, working in relief for about another 10 years. And once I met my wife, fell in love, got married, moved back to the United States. I missed the art world that I was a part of about 20 years prior. So I joined a group called the Vermont Comic Creators and started hanging out with them. And then I was on a Zoom call with one of them back in 2019. And I ended up having a conversation with them that lasted for like an hour. I'm like, I wish I recorded this. So then I decided to start a podcast where I'd interview. It started off by just doing a lot with just like comic book creators. My children, I have 3 kids. Now it's 10, 8, and 4. Really started getting into, as Venn diagrams go, I started then getting into children's books and then finding children's book authors to interview. And then from there, people said, oh, you interview authors? I'm like, yeah, I do kind of. And then, so then all of a sudden I started getting all these like long prose authors coming on my show. So that's why I had to separate it out into like 3 separate distinct podcasts. I've ended up now not working on my own stuff very much anymore. Now I'm just concentrating on talking to other people. And it's grown. I mean, from there, and as Jeff and Kurt know, with my love of interviews and doing podcasting, I ended up buying a radio station. So now I actually own a radio station, technically 3 radio stations. And now I'm in the process of buying a weekly newspaper. And it's all because of Jeff and Kurt that being able to have me do this. Just kidding, you guys, but you guys are a big part of my life.
My podcast too has been definitely an evolution. In the beginning, I kind of wanted to go back to like my Jerry Springer roots of like booking wild and crazy stories and then seeing what my dad thought about that. So in the beginning, I interviewed like a former KKK guy and a Jeffrey Epstein survivor and a phone sex operator and all of these interesting stories. And then I kept getting people coming to me with like they were either dads or daddy's girls, and they were more like relating to my relationship with my dad piece. So then I started really kind of focusing more on that. Like, okay, I'm cool interviewing an author, I'm cool interviewing a creative, but tell me a little bit about your upbringing and like what legacy means to you. And I feel like it's really gone more that direction.
It's a long story that I'm gonna keep very short. Basically, I've always had interest in comics, so I started writing articles for a website where I would every so often talk to experts for their input about whatever issue I was going to talk about. I moved into podcasting with another show. Then I realized I was doing most of the work for that show, so I decided to do my own. And because on my own, not all that interesting, I interview interesting people instead. And that's kind of what I do with my time.
For myself, it's very similar to Izolda. My show changed. I was Two Guys Talking webcomics way back in 2008. It evolved to Two Geeks Talking. Then it kind of spiraled into video and audio and a bunch of other things. And it was really just a matter of a friend of mine was creating a website database of webcomic creators. And I said, hey, we should do a podcast before that phrase became, cliche and cool or whatever the kids say these days. And so he's like, go ahead. So we started the show, and 17 years later, I'm still here, and it is what it is. And I'm now hosting a live stream with 8 amazing podcast hosts. You wanted to talk about, because you're an amazing tech guy, you wanted to talk about the audio, video, and podcasting side of technology and the ever-changing concept.
This has been on my mind for like the couple I'm just gonna do it very quickly. First off, I just want to say how to choose audio equipment. I'm sure everyone's here had some sort of, every time before you start a podcast, people are like, hey, how do you choose a piece of audio equipment? Usually these two audio equipment especially, it's always on people's radar. One is the Rodecaster. I'm sure everyone here heard about the Rodecaster, and everyone's like, hey, I want a big Rodecaster that costs about $600, $700, right? Do any one of you guys use Rodecaster? I'm just curious.
I have the Rode NT1.
Okay, Rode NT1 is different. Rodecaster is like the big, mixer looking one. Yeah. And then the other one is the Samsung Q2U, and then the other one is Blue Yeti. It should be 3. Blue Yeti sort of die off now. No one uses Blue Yeti, and no one should use Blue Yeti ever. People that use Blue Yeti doesn't really know how to use them. I'm sorry. Do you use Blue Yeti?
I got a Blue Yeti right. This is a Blue Yeti right here.
I'm so sorry. Well, the thing is, like, a lot of people just doesn't know how to use Blue Yeti. They either have their gain way too much in a room that's not treated, so like you just hear all the echoes everywhere, and then you also people that doesn't read the manual, so you speak on top of the microphone rather than the side where the logo is. That's the front of the microphone. I saw Jenna Fisher done that before. I saw Jocelyn Long has done that before on Chelsea. I'm like, why don't your producer ask you, tell you to fix that right away? But for people that think about how to choose the equipment, make sure the first thing first is to think about the format. Like, is it a interview format? Is it a remote recording format? Are you using everything that your equipment that you're thinking to buy at all? So let's say the Procaster has tons of the mount, has tons of the pad and 6-7 faders, tons of input and output. I've been troubleshooting with my friend. They are like, hey, I got this piece of gear, but I never use all of them. Like, what should I do? So you're $600 down the drain when you're using only one mic input. So make sure you decide your format first, and then decide on the equipment. And then if you're just starting out, you just want to try and see if you like podcasting at all, go with the Samsung Q2U. It was $50, USB straight to the computer, and then just call it a day. So that's my rant for the day instead of questions.
Anyone have questions or comments about their own technology issues or anything about this?
I'm sorry that I step on Blue Yeti toes.
That's great.
Yeah, Reena.
How can you make a Blue Yeti work?
Okay,
if you did buy that?
If you did buy that, first off, just read the manual first. The very big piece of paper. I think they only added it maybe 3 years ago. Like if you bought it pre 2019, there's no this piece of paper. So when you open the box, there's this piece of paper just show you which of the direction you should speak onto a microphone with an actual Yeti monster. Read that piece of paper before you plug it in. And then read the manual, because there's two knobs at the back of the Blue Yeti. There is the gain, and then there is the polar pattern. The gain, if you just started out, the gain should be all the way to the lowest possible, because it's a condenser microphone. It's very, very sensitive. So no matter how loud or how soft you're speaking to the microphones, make sure it's the lowest, so you're not distorting your audio signal or it's too loud. And make sure on the polar pattern is always choose, I believe it's the third to the left. It's look like a peach. What that is a cartwheel pattern. It will detect the signal from the front and then reject anything that's 180 degrees behind the microphone. Hopefully that makes sense.
I would say too is like one other point about that is for anybody that's listening or watching that's thinking about doing a podcast, they're wanting to start their own podcast, don't go right away buying the Cadillac of equipment. Yeah. Stick to something a beginner, because you have to learn how it works. And the other thing too is my recommendation is every time before you actually start recording or doing something, test your sound levels first, because you don't want to be in a conversation for an hour and then realize that you're actually like pulling off of the mic from your default webcam and not from the mic next to you, which has happened to me a couple of times. And then really understanding what your software that you're using to edit afterwards is going to be really important too. So. Yeah,
one thing I'm just picking back of that is, when you do sound check, even when you do remote, right, on Zoom, I appreciate Kurt is like, hey, your audio is peaking, it's distorting, popping. Can you do something about it? And then I do the troubleshooting on my end. But let's say if you have the host, and then let's say Reena come on as a guest with me, usually what you can do is, other than looking at the settings in your, let's say, Squadcast, Riverside, or Zoom, you can always scratch the microphone and then be like, hey, can you hear the scratch? And if Reena is like, yeah, I can hear the scratch, that means you're using the right equipment and the right instruments for the settings.
I want to sort of agree and also disagree with some of what's being said. On the one hand, I agree that if you're not sure, you should start a little smaller. On the other hand, a lot of this equipment can be multitasked, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 channels on my mixer board that I use, but I'm also a musician and I record singing and guitar and violin and keys and all of this other stuff as part of this. So some of this depends, as far as I'm concerned, when you're going shopping for your equipment. You're going to want to go to somewhere like in Maryland, there's Chuck Levin's. They have a microphone room. Some guitar centers have microphone rooms, things like that, where you can go and you can try mics, for example. You can plug in a pair of headphones, plug in a mic, try it, speak, see what you sound like, unplug, plug into another mic, try that. Instead of going, well, the latest, hottest thing is X, I'm going to go buy that, even if it's $100 or $1,000, what you need to do, as far as I'm concerned, is find the one that works with your voice and test it out. Find the headphones that work the best for you, that feel comfortable. This is a very, in many ways, isolated, but also visceral business that we're in, because you have to be comfortable, especially if you're doing long form interviews or long form solo episodes. You need to be comfortable with your tech, but you also need to be physically comfortable with what you're wearing on your head and what you're speaking into. And I have this microphone that I use for the podcast and a completely different condenser mic for anything I'm doing that's singing. But we have to remember that unless you're using like a really, really good microphone, you don't sound to the outside world the way you sound in your head. So you need to test it out and see what sounds best for your voice, for you, regardless of the cost. And I'm not talking like, oh, you should buy the most expensive thing, but rather you might find a microphone that's $60 that's amazing for you. And if it's amazing for you, then go with that, because it's ultimately going to have to be what you like, what sounds good to you, what your producer likes, or what sounds good to your producer if you have a production team. So don't be afraid to try a couple of different things and see what fits you and your budget.
I totally agree with that. And I think that's one thing that the podcasting industry lack, that if you're in pro audio, or like, so I started out as an audio engineer, that in studio space have, is we actually have different microphones that we can test it out. But in podcasting industry, people will be like, I'm going to go with the cheapest one. It's the cheapest, but might not work for your voice. You want to go and test out different microphone and see which one you like, but also always have a budget in mind. Like, hey, this one might sound better on me, but it's like $500-$600 more. Obviously, don't go with that one, you know. But yeah, like, go out and try it out, especially for headphones, because you have to wear it for at least an hour every time when you go on interview. You know, pick the one that you're most comfortable with, because everyone has a different earship, has a different head size. So yeah, so I would say, like, try out and test out everything that, if possible.
Yeah, let's move on to the next question here. We're going to join into Jeff's question. How do you get the big guest you've always wanted to interview?
I mean, obviously, there's a few ways to do it, depending on what your industry you're looking at: comic books, film, television, music, whatever. But the key, I would say, are a couple of things. First, I believe in what I call the ladder approach. You need to build trust first with the people, the companies, corporations, publicists you're trying to connect with. Jason Momoa probably shouldn't be your first introduction. I'm gonna be like, hey, let's go for your biggest name. They're, first off, who the hell are you? Second, keep your emails short and to the point. They don't have a lot of time. They have about 10, 15 seconds to figure out who you are, if you're worth their time, and what kind of person or individual you are that could potentially interview their client. My emails tend to be maybe 6, 7 sentences most. Never be fawning on these interviews as well. You don't want to be like, I love Jason Momoa so much. He's the most, he's my dream guest. I want to interview him so bad. You're going to look like an idiot. You're going to look potentially like a stalker, and you don't want to be doing that. Keep your emails short, sweet, with the key information. Who you are, what do you want to talk to these people about, who have you interviewed in the past, what kind of interview is going to be, is it Zoom, is it in person, they're trying to, I guess, could be, which is possible, and the email, be done with it. But start with what I call the ladder approach. If you have IDMB Pro, which is the key to getting TV and movie actors, or directors or screenwriters, look on their list of who their clients are. They have everyone's number, there's a rating. Don't start off at number 5, start at number 9,000. Build their trust, talk to the individual. You're more likely to get that yes, and now you're in the door. The more you're in the door, the better they get to know you, the more likely they're going to go into to take the risk on you to put their better clients on your show. Comic books as well. Talk to the publicists of DC, like DC or Marvel, or well, Image doesn't really do much on their end, but DC and Marvel. And don't start off with, hey, can I have Jeff Johns for an interview? No, ask for a guy writing the book with only 10,000 copies being sold. They'll be more likely to say yes, because no one's reading their book anyway. And then you build the rapport and you keep going. But the key is, beyond the latter approach, is treat every guest you had as if they are the Jason Momoa for that interview. Do not ever seem disrespectful or bored or half-ass any guest you get, because that will keep you from ever getting that guest you truly want. I guess that's there's more details obviously than that, but for the purpose of the show, we can leave it to that for now.
I want to jump in on this because, first of all, yay, I agree with you completely. And IMDb Pro is a phenomenal resource. So thank you for pointing that out. I also want to say a couple of things. First of all, one of the things that I'm very lucky to have is that the PR pros have found me. So I get about 30 to 40 pitches a day from people who want to be on the show, which is lovely. And yet, you need to have some sort of an infrastructure that when someone wants to be on your show, I have a little form that they have to fill out to tell me how they're going to sort of fit the mission of my show. That's something that's really important as far as I'm concerned, right? I want them to fill my show with the things that my audience wants to hear, in addition to having great guests. So I do that. I go, okay, this is what I want. This is how I'm going to want you to fill it out, blah, blah, blah. So that's part of it, is have an infrastructure for treating your guests professionally and making sure that they're going to be a good fit for your show and your show is going to be a good fit for them. I also have a PR pro thing, a little deck that I put together for PR pros so that they know the kind of guests I want them to pitch me. I don't want someone, I'm vegan. So for example, with that, I don't want anybody who's in the animal industry. No matter what you do, if you use animals for anything, I'm not going to want to talk to you. So I have had to train the PR pros themselves to go, okay, she doesn't want to talk to anybody like that, but I have this person who's a best-selling author. Great, I want to talk to you, right? So they now know. I work with, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 PR firms. They know who to pitch me. So I trained them to do that. And there's a deck that I have to do that. The other part of it is when a guest has a great time, and I agree with you completely, Jeff, that do what you absolutely can to make sure that the guest is just thrilled with their experience, I ask them, is there anybody you think I need to have on my show? And I've gotten some phenomenal guests just from asking that question at the end of our chat. Just like, who do you know who would be interested in coming on the show and talking about their creative process? Whoever they are, Grammy winners, Tony winners, doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is, are they interested in being on a show to talk about this stuff and their own inspiration? And so I ask guests, I ask people I meet in the street. I had a phenomenal Grammy winner, Odyssey, who's a rap artist. I was sitting at a restaurant outside here in Brooklyn, heard a guy talking about the fact that he was going on tour. And I literally stopped him and I said, hey, I don't know who you are. Who are you? And he told me his name is Odyssey. He's a music producer and artist, and he's traveling the world rapping. That's what he does. And I'm like, I need you on my show. He's been on the show, and he got me new people to be on my show. Right. So that's another way to do it. Don't be afraid. Have your business card or your digital business card ready. If you are out there and you hear someone talking about something that has something to do with your show or your interests, introduce yourself, talk to them, see if they'd be a good fit or if they know people who'd be a good fit.
I want to point to Jay because he is behind the scenes of the James Altucher show, and they book a ton of like famous celebrity types. So you've got to give us some insight into how you get the guests.
Well, I think I was lucky. I have to attribute to my luck and my boss as well, because my James already have a big following, so it's easier to get guests on the show. But a couple things that I have done is that no matter if I know if that guest's gonna come on the show before or if he's gonna say yes or no, I always like, hey, I always reach out. So let's say we have someone that came on the show before, or I know someone that I want them to be on the show. If anything's happened in their life, let's say they just got married or they just have a baby or anything, always just reach out and say, hey, congratulations, have this, blah, 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 blah. Build a rapport, build like some sort of connections and network a little bit. Also going to different conferences and meeting different people, that helps too. Even on social media, I think Reena do the same too. Like on social media, if you follow Brian Keating, you respond to Brian Keating's post or like comments. So start building rapport with them that way. Doesn't matter on Instagram, Twitter, or anything. Just go and report. Know that, hey, this person exists and this person is not a bot that just follow my account. Then that way, building that rapport can sort of help you land the guest.
Yeah, I want to piggyback a little bit onto that. Brian Keating is how I got to you, Jay, because he introduced us. I think I was working for Kathy Heller, and like she was wanting me to reach out to James Altucher to be on her show, but that didn't first come together. And then I saw that somebody I was connected to was connected to James, and then I ended up, through Brian connecting me to you, getting James on my show. So, there has to be, I feel like, a lot of touch points if you want to get somebody famous. Like, it took me 1.5 years to actually get Jerry Springer on my show, and I was connected to his publicist. So I got yes, I got no, I got yes, I got no. But one thing that you said that is so, so true. If somebody has a baby, congratulate them on that. If they are going on a book tour, say, hey, I'd love to read your book and have you on if you're looking to be on a podcast. So I also think like sharing their content and actually listening to their content, you can find something to add on to the conversation that they're already having. And I feel like that works really well. I got Katie Couric to share me because I went to one of her events and she saw me in the audience taking picture and, quoting people from the event. And then I share her stuff. I listen to her stuff. And then she was like, oh, wow, this chick is actually like a fan.
Yeah, I love that. The fact that there's social media presence, the fact that you're providing a human touch, a human connection to this content, whether you're a fan or whether you're trying to get a guest. The interest factor is a key aspect of it. And once you dive down the rabbit hole, you might find common interests that you didn't realize you had based on their celebrity persona versus, their themselves as an actual person. So I think that's a wonderful connection to have overall.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit on that is that I think Jordan Harbinger from, the Jordan Harbinger show told us this before, or at least on the James Altucher show, what he said that like, you make sure you personalize every interactions with the person, even though it's on social media. Don't just say, hey, congratulations on your baby. Just say, hey, I remember blah blah blah. I remember talk about you have like your wife was pregnant for how long. Congratulations on the baby. I hope you sleep well. I hope you get to sleep often and stuff like that. Yeah. So personalize the response and the interactions doesn't that helps as well.
I think it almost rolls over into the question that I was going to ask later and kind of bring up as well. Not to jump on that, but I really think that when you are searching for those guests, my question was more, how do you find those quality guests versus quantity? I started this podcast very recently last fall, and I have an influx of people that are filling my messages. Hey, I'd love to be on your show. I see your numbers. And it was very overwhelming at first. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I have so many people that want to talk. And what I need to kind of step back and do is look at, do all of these guests fit my values? Who are the ones that I want on the show, or am I just trying to fill a spot? I go back to, like Izolda said, being vegan, you're not going to want to have somebody in the animal industry on your show, even if they do reach out, even if it could get you 5 or 10 more guests, however many more episodes. You have to kind of stick to those values. So I think I want to kind of reach out to all of you here and get your ideas as a new podcaster. How do you balance that quality over quantity? How do you stick to your values? Am I staying in the reason that I started podcasting? So I kind of want to open it up, and anybody that has some insight, I'd highly appreciate it.
I think when it comes down to quality versus quantity, at first you're just trying to get your show out there. At first you're just trying to get as many guests as you possibly can, just so that you can say, I've had a successful podcast because I've interviewed X amount of people. At some point, you take a step back and you start saying, am I doing too much? Is the quality of guests that I'm bringing onto the show exactly what I want to bring onto the show? And I think that's a telling tale of what exactly you're trying to do as a host itself, because your show may change and evolve as you change and evolve as a host, because your questions may change, your style of interviewing may change if that's your style of show. But I think it comes back to sticking to your core values of why you wanted to get started, and that can be very difficult when you get, I've done 200 shows in a year, or you start getting burnt out with the show, or you start getting an influx of people that maybe you don't want to speak to, but you have a deadline you want to meet, and things like that kind of pile up on you. It's on you as a host to create a quality show. It's not on you to take everyone's, I want to be on your show, put me on your show, etc. Don't take that all into yourself. Talk with other people to kind of relieve your mind when it comes to, don't burn yourself out as fast as you may.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that really quickly. I think, what Kurt said is totally right. But so for the James Altucher show, we get pitched like thousands of business book a month or a couple months. Like everyone write about the same thing. Taking cold plunge, time management, that's what every business book is talking about. So ultimately, James would be like, okay, I don't care about this. I don't care about this. What really matters to him is what can you learn from this guest. That's how you find a quality guest, because the audience is an X-rays machine. Your audience is an X-ray machine. If your audience hear that you are really interested in this person because you can learn something from this person, that's like the ultimate way to find a quality guest. And also you can also reduce burnout that way, because if you do the same business book all the time, you're like, I got bored of this. Also, sometimes, I'm not sure if you have considered this, if you have no guests, just do a solo episodes, because your followers or your listener listen to you not for guests. They're listening to you, for who you are.
And I absolutely love that point. But I did, 12 solo episodes before I started talking to other people. I'm going to do more solo episodes to update. I always tell my listeners, mental health, the journey is ebbs and flows. It's going to go up and down. So you're going to get updates from me. So I appreciate that, getting that mix so there isn't that burnout. I love the networking that you guys were talking about. Reena has been such a blessing to send me so many people like, hey, I think this person would be great on your show, or shout me out. And so I appreciate that camaraderie that we have. I think it looks like, hey, I had this person on my show. seemed like a good fit. Maybe they'd be a good fit. So kind of that word of mouth quality. Again, I appreciate all of that.
I'm right there with you, actually. So Reena has done the same for me. That's how Kurt and I met. But also, I would like to say that, again, those pre-interview materials, like the form that I have, so important. I tell people up front, for example, I'll go back to the vegan thing. No animals, no animal products, no da 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 in the form, and they have to agree to that. If they don't do that, they can't be on the show. I also tell that to all the PR people. And for right now, for example, I'm not taking any coaches. Every coach wants to be on my show, and I'm just not. And I say that no sales, marketing, or coaches, folks. That's it. If you see that and you're a sales, marketing, or coach person, don't bother applying. You won't get in. So that's part of it, is you have to know who you want. Like, really study for yourself. If you're a new podcaster or you've been doing it forever and ever and a day, take sort of a survey of yourself of who you want on your show, the kind of information they have to give. And I tell everybody who comes on the show, I want 60% of what they say to be for my audience, 30% to be for them, and 10% can be for me, for the things that just is between the two of us. But the majority of it needs to be geared towards what my audience wants to hear.
I would say too is that the piece of it too is, as everybody's been saying, is like what we provide is that we provide a mostly an audio form of entertainment. And the point about an audio form of entertainment is like people get to imagine how the conversation's going. What we do is our base goal and mission is to educate, entertain, and inform. And being able to do all three of those is going to be ideal. The onus is on us to entertain and keep that entertainment and information to our listeners. Our guest that comes on changes every week. And so it's our job to make sure that our listeners are being educated and entertained and informed. And the biggest piece that I've seen when I was promoting I have a dad joke book, so just kind of explore. When I was going through that, I noticed I went through all kinds of podcasts and there was all different levels of podcast hosts. And I realized that it made me a better podcast host to see the mistakes others people made. Like, one is podcasting 101 is do your research on who your guest is. There's nothing that's more frustrating than when you get on the show and someone's like, so what do you do? I'm like, wait, we're going to be talking for an hour and you have no idea who I am. Like, it's like.
Well, I mean, I would also, we're talking about quality of hosting. A decision I think everyone needs to make before they start hosting is whether or not you want to be the star or you want your guest to be the star. I think that's like the key thing to keep in mind. I think there are clearly hosts that believe they're the star, and there's hosts that want the guest to be the star, and you got to make that decision. That does dictate your entire process of doing your interview. That's everything.
That's a good point. I actually was just listening to Roseanne Barr, who I find to be hilarious. I was listening to her podcast last week, and she had on Adam Carolla, and she was talking about, I love to talk. Like, she loves to talk as much as the guest. And I don't think everybody that has interview shows actually wants to talk as much as her. As a guest, you kind of got to know the format of the show and what you're getting into before you agree to go on someone's show. Because if you're going on somebody's show that wants to talk equally as much as you, you're going to have to leave room for that so you don't step on them.
Yeah, and I always recommend people listen to my episodes. Like, take an episode and listen to one before you're on the show to see what it's like. Because if you are expecting A and what you're getting is Z, then there's going to be a real disconnect there. But if you listen to an episode, and if I may review the podcast after you've listened to an episode, that's always good for us podcasters to remember. Reviews are good. Please do that so that you know what you're getting into, just like I'm going to do research about you to make sure that we have a great conversation. I'd love it if you would do a little research into the podcast before you come on so that we have a great conversation.
I think it also comes back to, like, for myself, the show is about the guest. I don't like doing solo episodes because it's just not the way I'm wired. I would rather have the guest talk and I'll ask my questions and away we go. And that just has worked for me. But I understand the need to fill space and to fill the void of a deadline where you have to have an episode every week or every other day or whatever the case may be. But Izolda, your form itself, I've actually borrowed that concept in terms of putting it into my own sign-up sheets, and it has saved me so much time and headache and hassle and all the stuff of people that I didn't realize I didn't want to talk to. So it worked out well. So I appreciate that.
That's
two
awesome.
things. I just want to add two things really quickly. Is one is about the review. I think Izolda talk about the review. Hey, I listened to it and then I will review it. It will be great. I don't know if any of you have gotten this pitch before. You will have PR people reach out to you. They say, hey, I'm gonna pitch you this person, but hey, at the same time, I just review your podcast, and then it's sort of transaction. So if people reach out to me and pitch the guest that way, like, hey, I review your podcast, can we have our client on your show? 100% just reject them. That happened to me like 10 times.
Well, the other thing I'll say, I know has happened to me a few times. I'm sure it's happened to others. When you get the pitch of the A and the B, take on the B guest, and it will set up the A guest, and that's always bullshit. If anyone's wondering, that's always bullshit. Never accept the B guest if they're teasing the A one. It's always bullshit.
Yeah, it's always bullshit. Yeah, like PR people. Yeah, I wouldn't call them scam, but they kind of scam me sometimes. And then the other thing, let's say if you're a new podcast, you want to start a podcast. I felt like not a lot of people talk about this often. Is interview format and conversational format are two vastly different things. Like Izolda said, like, hey, if you are an interview podcast, make sure you 60% of the things that you said has to be for the audience, and then maybe a little bit about you and maybe a little bit about us. And the conversational podcast is like Reena said with Rosenbar, they were just both talking. So make sure you have to set your expectations for your guests or for your host, like, hey, we are the interview podcast, we'll ask questions and then just revolve around the question, or we are the conversational podcast, we will have this topic but keep talking about those.
And I'm going to just throw out one more thing. This is important because I've been both a host and I'm also on the side of publicist. So I've been on both sides of things. And I think also if you do want to get better guests, you do want to get a better quality of guests, professionalism is key, and not just simple things that you might not even consider, like the link. Don't send the link 20 minutes before the show. Have it, just, what I'm saying, like, have it as soon as possible. There's certain things you can do that just makes you look more professional, look like you're in control, and look like you're taking seriously the guest. And I'll say the pulse that drives me the most crazy is when there's someone sending one of my clients onto a show and they're like, 5 minutes from show, they're like, oh yeah, no, it's coming. It's like, it should have come yesterday. What I'm saying? It's like little things of just basic professionalism does separate you from a unprofessional that will eventually just die on the vine because they can't get the guest because they alienated too many publicists, too many guests with unprofessional behavior back and forth.
Your question, Reena, first about researching guests, because I think that ties into what we were just talking about.
I learned this from, I'm going to shout out another podcaster, Sean Dillon from Beyond the Mic. One trick that he taught me that I absolutely loved was go to people's social media and see how they respond to other people's posts. You can literally scroll back through years of comments on Twitter and just see how they've responded to other people. You will really get to know someone like that. You can use the language that they use in conversation. I love to do that. I love to see how they have responded to other people through their social media and what they're talking about on their social media. So that's one of my good tricks. See what they're lately talking about. Another really good trick I like with the people that I'm going to interview is I go to their most recent like LinkedIn recommendations and I see who has vouched for them. And then I'll connect with like 2 or 3 of them and I'll just be like, hey, I saw you wrote a stellar review for Izolda. I'm getting ready to interview her. I'll tell them a little bit about the podcast and I'll say, hey, is there anything that you're dying to ask her or any curveball questions you might have or anything that you think that I should ask her? Also, then when you put together the podcast, connects you to 3 people that love Izolda and you could say, hey, afterwards you might want to check out the question I shouted you out in the episode. So I think that that is a really kind of like insider thing to do is become friends with their friends. And also this kind of goes without saying, but maybe not for new podcasters. I always listen to 1 or 2 episodes that they've been on somebody else's podcast, or if they have a podcast, what are they recently talking about? If they haven't been on somebody else's podcast, I stalk their social. And if they have a podcast, I listen to their podcast. And if they've been on somebody else's show, I listen to them on someone else's show. That's kind of what my research tends to look like.
I'm going to back you up on that. One memory I did have, because I invited the guest before checking the socials. This was maybe first or second year. And after going on the socials, I politely canceled the interview. I was like, okay, I can't have this individual on my show. He's definitely not someone who is the kind of person I want to bring to my audience. Keep in mind, one thing that even though what we were going to talk about wasn't what bothered me about what he was talking about, every time you bring someone on your show, you are advertising not just what they're trying to sell, but everything they're say on the social media, because you're eventually bringing them down that line. And you've got to take responsibility for that. So yeah, I definitely had to cancel. I don't think I told him I think I was like, you know what? Unfortunately, I'm going to be canceling the episode. And I just, politely left it. It does help to check. It does help to check because you never know who you're bringing on the show and what you're potentially exposing your listeners to.
I so wholeheartedly agree with that. I have had to say the words, I'm afraid I'm no longer able to offer you an interview on the podcast so many times. And you have to say it. You have to be professional. You have to be polite. But I have this amazing nonprofit. They're restoring the coastline, the shoreline in California. They're doing amazing work. I was like, yes, yes, yes. Buried way down deep. And their website was blah, 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 fishing. And I went, up. And this was going to be a phenomenal get as far as an interview. And they pitched me. I didn't pitch them. But I saw this one little mention of the fact that they do things with fisheries, and that's my deal breaker. So I had to go, oh, thank you so much. And then they came back and were like, no, but he doesn't have to talk about it. And then you get into that sort of, what are your values? And I still said no. But we owe ourselves, not just the socials, but I've gone to the university the person went to and looked them up if they're a relatively recent grad. I go to their about sections on their websites, obviously their LinkedIn, their accomplishments, all of that. If they're in Standard & Poor's, I will check that. I used to work for a company called the Information Prospector, where we did public records research on people. So have they been in newspapers? When was the last time they had earned media when someone was interviewing them on a show or a newspaper, things like that? There are so many avenues of research that are open to us to find out how they present themselves in public. Also, that's another facet of this, not just what they're talking about, but how are they going to talk? Some people don't want cussing and swearing on their show. Some people don't care. But also, if you're talking to me, I'm not abrasive. I'm not an investigative journalist who's trying to trip you up. And I know that about myself. Like, I've done that research inside my own head. So if you're coming on and you're going to be really abrasive, you're not someone who's going to be right for my show anyway. And it's good to know that before we take the time to do all of the interviewing and all of that.
It's about setting boundaries. And I think that ties into really what my question was going to be perfectly honest, because that is a valid point, because there's so many avenues we can access everyone's information, but they can access our own too. So are we a good fit for them? I think that's another background question. Or are they just trying to get that spot and fill in your schedule?
You got to think about what audience do you want. I will say on my show, I've had different actors, writers, stuff like that, and they will, they'll be political sometimes as well. And I have to make a decision. Do I want anyone who watches my show at this point will just know that I'm hardcore liberal. That's just how it goes. And I realize I'm losing part of my audience because of it. And when I turn down a guest, say there's another guest who I didn't realize turns out was hardcore in the opposite direction. I'm now dealing with responses on my page from time to time of this crazy person. I'm like, okay, well, I brought this onto my show. And you got to think about, now I got to make us, stand the next time. I'm not going to I got to be a little more careful who's coming on to make sure that I'm not bringing on someone who is totally against how I feel politically or some area that I could feel responsible for. There's a guest I had too, as I was interviewing, he had a very opposite my point of view politically poster next to him. And during the show, I kind of froze. I was like, oh crap, you know what I'm saying? Then I asked him, I was like, what's that? He's like, oh, I'm in a movie where I'm playing a character and this is advertising that thing, but he's an asshole. I realize. It's like, okay. You kind of let some things go, but you got to make sure you got to be aware of what audience you want, and then be willing to lose an audience as well if you do want to make that stand. It's going to be clear that, let's say, a far-right person is not going to be on your show, or you're going to say something that's going to offend a far-right individual. You realize you're going to lose that viewer potentially, and make a decision if that's what you want to do or not.
Yeah, there have been times where I've had to completely delete a completely edited posted interview based off of someone's legal troubles as well. It just wasn't a valuable interaction once the law gets into play. Whether it's allegedly or not, it doesn't matter. It's like, you got to cut your ties where you cut your ties. No matter how much work you put into it, whether it was an interactive interview or podcast, wherever the case may be, it's just sometimes you have to take the loss and just wipe it off the internet for as much as you can. That balances into my particular question. The fact that we're looking over quality over quantity when it comes to guests, the fact that we've given so much information from the research side of things about how we schedule guests, how we get pitched guests as well too, I think that's rather valid. My question is along the lines of, what happens when you get a guest that repeatedly signs up for your show and then cancels? At some point, at least for me, I say, I'm sorry, this is my boundaries, And I actually have a thing in my calendar where it says, if you've been on the show this year, please be mindful of other potential guests and apply next year.
I mean, I'll say for me, for part of it depends on the size of the, how many views I assume the guest could bring. I will be honest about that. If it's a indie person who I think won't get me didn't show, then usually sometimes I'm a little harder line. But usually my rule is 3 and out. You got 3 strikes. The third strike, I don't care how big you are. I'm not taking you back to my show. Same rule of how long I'm going to wait for you. If you confirm 15 minutes, if you didn't confirm 10, after that, you'll have a few times when after 20 minutes, I'm gonna phone call, be like, "Hey, the guy's ready to come on." It's like, I don't care, I'm done. I mean, that's just how it goes, and you got to hold the line just for your own sanity. I think sometimes just for your own. I have principles, and I'm not gonna be your bitch. And sorry to swear, and and let you cancel me over and over again. It's not fair. You got 3 shots.
The one point I would say, like, I've always agreed with things that Kurt and Jeff have done 95% of the time. But the one thing I do say that you guys do that I tried and it did not work was have an automatic Calendly thing where people can sign up. I let people email me, and then that gives me that width and breadth to actually then take a pause and then decide if they're going to be a good fit or not. And then I have people that have come on. I actually have, it's called the friend of the show, which Jeff and Kurt knows. If anyone's been on my show 3 times, they get the moniker friend of the show. And they say, oh, I'll send you the tattoo, all that kind of, and I don't have tattoos. But the piece of it about it though, is that I've had some people say, hey, I want to come back on. And it wasn't a good interview. The person's nice, but it's like watching paint dry. And as much as I like to think I'm good to get questions out of people, I'm like, I'm getting nothing out of this person. So what I'll do is like, listen, I talked to my social media advisor and they said, don't have anybody else come back on the show unless they've had at least 50 downloads or views of your review. And I said, listen, if you want to come back on, you need to promote the other stuff we did first. If not, I can't. I'd love to, man, but man, I can't.
I think I brought some of those clients to your show.
And probably some of mine as well, too.
You all are hilarious. Okay, so it's very interesting to me, that notion of being, I guess, kind, and maybe that's telling me something about myself. I have a really very simple policy. You get 1 emergency, 1 cancel, right? If you have an emergency and you need to cancel, that's one thing. If you have something that comes up and you need to cancel, that's another thing. Past that, you're just not eligible. That's it. I personally am not going to spend all of the time doing the research and all of the time getting prepped and ready to have you cancel last minute. And I had one guest who would have been an amazing get. He just repeatedly canceled. And that's when I learned my lesson. I went, no. They just kept going, oh, I'm so sorry. It turns out he has to be in Venezuela. I don't care. I don't care if he has to be in Venezuela. What I care about is he made a commitment. And if he can't meet that commitment, then what kind of a guest is he really going to be? And do I want that represented on my show? To your point about the Calendly thing, you don't get access to my Calendly until you filled out my form and I see who you are. You don't get access. Only a guest that I know I want gets, because I have multiple copies, multiple versions of the form. The guest that gets the form that has the Calendly link at the bottom is a guest I know I want and I've vetted. Even though they're still going to have to fill out all the information like, what are possible headlines for the show? What's your bio? What questions do you want to talk about? All of that's in there. And at the bottom is like, okay, now go fill out the Calendly form at your convenience so that we can have our interview. Because some people need to show you that they are the right stuff. And some people you want. So it's not one size fits all. But as far as ghosting, one of the things that I do is I read tarot cards and palms, and I've done it like at the White House and things like that. So I've been doing it for a long time. I'm pretty well known in the world. I've had people come on and try and test me, and I'm like, you're not doing yourself any favors. You could be getting a reading that's useful to you, or we could be wasting each other's time. I don't want you to waste my time. I don't want you to waste your time. Don't bother with this, right? So it's the same kind of thing with guests. Just as I need to give them consideration and respect, they need to do the same for me. And if they can't, because they're so busy, then maybe right now they're just too busy to be on podcasts and they need to go elsewhere for their PR. That's totally fine. No harm, no foul. I just don't want to be in a situation where I'm making myself crazy doing the research or getting upset because someone keeps canceling. It's not worth it to me to have them on the show, no matter how big they are, because my peace of mind is more important than whether or not they get on the episode.
I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely. you have to have this balance of human understanding. Like you said, if there's an emergency, okay, I get it. Things pop up all the time. Life's crazy. But if it's a pattern, at some point, you have to kind of be a little selfish and go, it's kind of a privilege for you and I to even be having this conversation to try to set this up. It would be a privilege if you're trying to get on here, if you're pushing this hard, and be a little selfish and go, hey, this is not worth my time. This is not worth the mental energy I'm putting into it. A lot of us have lives outside of the podcast, whether that's a full-time job, families, just taking time for ourselves, which I know can be very hard for me to have some me time, but you have to balance that. Is all of this worth it? And I think that goes back to that quality over quantity. And if it's causing you more stress than the enjoyment of the podcast or the idea of the interview, set that hard line. Tell them, sorry, it's not going to work out.
I'm going to piggyback on what you just said. Actually, I don't think it's being selfish. I think it's being professional. I think you're treating yourself as a professional when you say this isn't a good fit because of the logistics here, and that's totally fine. And it's funny and I'm just going to say this, and I'm sorry if this is going completely off the rails, but somewhere along the line, podcasting has become this thing where the paradigm is you should be doing it for the love of the game. And if you're not doing it for the love of the game, then you're wrong. This is a business for us as well as it being something we enjoy and love. You wouldn't do that to your doctor. You wouldn't come into a doctor's office and keep canceling and not showing up and expect them to just take you whenever you're ready. Why would we as podcasters be any different? We're professionals. We need to behave like professionals, and we need to treat ourselves and the show as a professional endeavor. And if someone is blowing you off, after a while, you have to set your boundary and, more importantly, stick to it.
The reason I give more than one chance too, though, keep in mind too, is also an investment of yourself. For instance, there was a composer recently of a TV show. I'm not going to name the composer of the TV show. And I did watch the episodes. So I did get the music. I did put X amount of time researching it. That time, I think, can be paid off when the show person came on to give me the episode and the views that I earned by doing all the research. I do think you got to think about it as well too. How much investment do you want to put in? And sometimes I do think given the second or third chance, sometimes the second chance is for you more than it is for them, because you don't want to waste X amount of resources that you've spent already building into the guest that you need to pay off from. So something I would consider as well.
Yeah, and like for me, it's like I've been fortunate to only have a few people that have canceled, and I've always just assumed good intentions. And 9 times out of 10, it was either, oh, I completely forgot, or when I've been completely ghosted, I'm like, I guess they don't care. Like, I guess I'll move on to someone else. So it's been those things where I've just assumed something bad happened, and I reached out to them later, and then I've been able to reschedule. But I agree is that it's what we're providing is a service to them, and it needs to be treated with the dignity and respect of the time we're invested into it. And I believe most people seem to understand that. But for me, I just wish they would actually invest more time in sharing the interview than I would. So it's like, we're giving you marketing materials. So utilize it as a marketing material. And the better, more evergreen we make it, the more you can actually then continue using this as a marketing material.
I'm curious about, because, Jay, you work on this big show. Like, do you get cancellations? Do you do?
All the time. Yeah.
Okay, talk about that. I'm surprised.
Well, because, James sometimes could be, a little bit controversial, depends, his stance. Like, he generally very neutral in terms of politics or anything, but sometimes neutral might not be good enough for certain people. So they'll be like, hey, they wouldn't flat out say like, hey, this is not perfect fit for us. They were like, oh yeah, we're just gonna push our the podcast maybe a couple weeks down, and then they just never respond. But we do have some person that James always read their books before they come on, and then we will have one very good friend of the show just wrote a book that's totally out of his realm, and then James read it, and then he's like, this is not a good book. I don't want to promote this. His other books is fine. This is not a good book. He shouldn't have written this. So I have to reach out like, hey, I'm sorry, James is not available. Maybe we can come back on in like a couple weeks or whatever when your next book is out. So we sometimes have to do that. And it's not fun because we know that person is a good friend of the podcast. We do want to ruin the relationship, but sometimes if it's a bad book, you know, you want to do your audience or listener a disservice by just promoting a bad book, you know. So yeah, that happened.
I've had that too, where I liked somebody's first book and then they sent me a couple other ones. I was like, oh no. And I agree. Like, if you're saying this is a great book, go out and get one. And you're like, I couldn't get through it. I tried to make myself read it 3 times. You're like, maybe not.
One tip
Yeah.
I'm taking from Reena, because we were introducing a guest to each other through email, and their introduction had something to do with their book. And Reena, this will stick in my head, wrote, "Can I get a copy of that? Can I read this before I'm promoting it? Can I read it?" And that was just a light bulb moment for me. So that's something I'm stealing from you and going to be using going forward. So as you were speaking, I was just like, oh, that's that email from Reena.
I'm going to dive into the last question here to kind of wrap up this amazing conversation. This has been a real wonderful, like, head scratching experience, inducing coma of podcasting. So I love it. Coma is the horrible word because I just didn't have my thesaurus in front of me. Give me a break here. And I can't go to the internet because it would pull up. Anyhow, final question is, of course, a hot button topic for all podcasters and everyone creative in some way, shape, or form. Barney, I'm going to let you take away with this particular question. What is the question that you always want to... oh, shoot. I'm sorry. Before we jump into Barney's, I feel horrible about this. We got into a good conversational flow. Izolda, your question is more valid than Barney's question at this particular point in time because we're talking about communication. So please tell us what your question was.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That was very, that was very funny. I'm like, we didn't do my question. So basically, the question that I raised for everyone to think about is how to best use your physical and emotional voice to engage, inspire, and excite your guests and your audience and build those communication skills so that you have great conversations. And it was, I'm still just laughing because we got so into our conversation and it was flowing so beautifully that we sort of went, oh yeah, and we kind of skipped one. But here's the thing about that. This notion of having a good conversation, to me, there are a few things that we need to think about with this. And before I open it up to everybody else, first you need to prepare, obviously, and not just prepare do your research, but I mean your physical and emotional self. I always advocate before you get on any kind of recording session, warm up your voice, warm up your body, warm up your spirit. Make sure that you have done some physical movement to get all of the joints lubricated. Make sure you've done some breathing exercises. And if anybody wants them, I have a really great 7-minute warm up that I can share that I did with she is a doctor of physical therapy, and she modeled what you can do as I do the voiceover and tell you what to do. And it's wonderful. It's like 7.5 minutes long. It's beautiful. It's easy to use, easy to do. So warm yourself up, warm up your voice, warm up your body, and get yourself into an emotional state where what you're really interested in doing is having a conversation. In other words, that you are not only preparing your speaking skills, but also building up those listening skills. Are you present? Are you worried about something? Are you happy about something? Figure out where you are so that you can bring your very authentic self to being present and listening. I was doing a long form, all my interviews are long form, and I was doing a long form interview with someone who's a DJ on the radio. And she said, paid me a lovely compliment. She said, you do really present hosting. And I went, what do you mean by that? She said, I felt like you were with me no matter what I was saying every step of the way. And that takes some fierce concentration. So you also need to build some of those skills so that you are available to both listen and speak and converse and communicate with that give and take. As far as the actual speaking part, the way that I look at it is, again, what Jay was talking about earlier with the tech. Make sure you have a setup that works for you, that feels good, that feels organic, that feels like you can have a conversation. Test your microphone, test your headset, do all of that stuff so that it becomes second nature and you don't have to worry about it so much. Just check it and go, because then you can be really present and ready to speak to your guest and to listen to what they have to say. The other part of it is, and I forget who it was who said they journal a lot. I journal a ton. And I think about that when on days that I'm doing interviews, I put that kind of intention into my journaling. Write down that you want to be present, that you want to be authentic, that you want to listen to and converse with your guest. So that's part of your emotional makeup. And then you leave some of your troubles, unless you have the kind of podcast that where you are, let's all rant and rage. If you're because some people do, there are lots of potential podcasts out there for that, but definitely give yourself the mindset you want to bring into the podcast interview or the solo episode if that's what you're doing. Make sure that that's front and center when you show up ready. And last but not least, get on a little bit early so that you're not going, where's everything? Make sure I have to set up your documentation if that's what you need. Have your questions in front of you. Make sure that your equipment is working. Make sure that you have lots and lots of water so that you're hydrated. Unless you're Tim Ferriss, who does those drunk dialing shows, which I just think is hilarious. But yeah, be sure that you are ready with everything that you need so that you can be present and accounted for at the beginning and even before the beginning, and then concentrate, listen, and speak with good responses, not reactions. And I like to say that the difference between a reaction and a response is the difference between what happens and how many breaths you take before you decide what to do about it. So breathing is paramount. Make sure that you're responding, not just reacting in conversation with your guests. And now I'd love to open it up to everybody else and see what your thoughts are on how to be vocally and emotionally and physically present to do these wonderful podcast episodes that you're all doing.
Well, first off, I want that 7-minute thing just so that I can
Yeah.
recenter myself. Because, there have been times where I've done shows where if I go back to back on something, I'm mentally gone. Like, I'm mentally drained, and I am just fighting through my Word document of thought-provoking questions, and I'm taking my 15 that I've blocked out for that guest, and I'm just going to burn through it as quickly as I can, but still remain as engaged as I can. So please send that to, I think, the group in the chat if you could, or email or whatever. That'd be amazing.
One of the things I learned, within the radio business is like we, as I would say, those that are using sound as an art form, we have two tools at our disposal. We have silence and we have words. So being able to find a time to make sure that we utilize all those, because there is a time when not saying anything is just as powerful as coming up with a good question or a good response after your guest has talked. So
Just want to add something that's really, kind of hilarious, but it works for me. Is before I go onto a show, I always watch a stand-up comedy show, which is weird because first off, it's funny. It will prep my mental state in like positive state, and then stand-up comedian has this great skill that a lot of people might not have, is they have very keen and great observation skill. So just sort of watching them doing that changed my personality in the sense that like I gonna be very observant during that whole, during the taping, the whole entire taping sessions. And then after that, I would just toss that skill away because I didn't really need them, but I'll only need them for that show. But yeah, I usually just watch stand-up comedy show just to get myself in that mental state and copy their personality and their skill if I could.
Yeah, and also I tell my guests in the moment of, like, literally, if you listen to an episode, you'll hear me say, when I pause, I have embraced the pause. I literally will allow there to be dead air for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, whatever it is, while I synthesize, listen, think about what you've just said. And at first, people are like, I'm going to try and fill the silence. I'm like, you don't have to. It's okay for us to take a breath. Literally, we will both pause. There will be a little bit of dead air. And I'll invite the audience, if you're listening to this, take a couple breaths with us so that we can come back and be present with one another. So important to just go, yeah, I don't have to have all the answers right away. I am allowed to take this time to think about it before I respond.
I just have a couple comments. One, I'm piggybacking off of what Barney said. One thing I learned from radio is to have like a picture of, maybe a kid or a friend or somebody that you can talk to naturally next to the computer, because that helps you kind of get in the right mindset of just like being yourself and feeling supported. And then another thing I wanted to bring up, Jay and I have done like some commercials together for different brands. And one time he told me, he was like, Reena, act like you're talking to like your 5-year-old, you know? And that instantly like put me in like such a different voice, such a different like part of who I am. So I think there's little mind tricks like that, whether you're watching a comedian or whether you're looking at a picture of somebody who supports you and loves you and like accepts you for exactly who you are, but or whether you look at your kid and you're like, okay, now I'm talking about being a mompreneur. So kind of get in that space. I think it's interesting that just thinking about somebody can also change how you communicate.
It needs to have this natural flow. Is skill, whether it's in podcasting, interviewing, or just everyday life, that's been really important for me to learn, is listening to understand versus listening to respond. We are trained to, we hear a keyword or a phrase and we start coming up with our response. I'm going to reply like this. You're missing the rest of that person's answer. You're missing that conversation. So trying to just be mindful, understand that your response is not more important than understanding what's going on. Because if you have your questions laid out, you might go on autopilot and just, Rena's going to talk about kids or something like that. I'm going to go, oh, great. So let's talk about buildings. And that didn't even match up, because I wasn't listening. I heard something else. And so I think it's important to have that skill in general. Listen to understand, even if you're not as conversation based, even if it is more interview style, you want to know what your interview guest is saying. You want to sound like you know what you're talking about, and you don't want to just sound like you're rattling off questions.
I think it comes back to, yes, the active listening is a huge aspect of interviewing, whether you're a one-on-one or in this case a one-on-7. So it comes back to actively trying to engage with the person that you're speaking with, but also actively listening as well. I think for me, when it comes down to, yeah, you have your questions, but if you can weave those into the conversation itself, that is a little more of a seamless transition. It takes time, it takes practice, but it also takes your comfortability with yourself as a speaker, as a communicator. Can you weave your question seamlessly into, oh yeah, I had a similar experience when I interviewed person X, Y, and Z. And so that actually leads into what I wanted to speak to you about question number 8 or whatever the case may be. We're all people. We all just want to have a wonderful conversation and a wonderful time. And if we can do that through our voice and through our listening, then that's the best thing we can do. And everyone here is a professional when it comes to what they have accomplished in that regard.
And one also too, just on the end of that though, Kurt, is that at the end of the day, what does your audience expect? If your audience expects it to be purely flow conversational, then that's one thing. But if they expect there's segments to your podcast where all of a sudden, okay, now we're going to talk about your top 5 favorite books or whatever, there has to be a balance based off of what your audience is expecting from you and your show as well.
Last question, ironically, is with Barney here. So I say ironically because Jeff and I know what exactly he's going to speak to. Barney, what is your question to kind of wrap up this conversation?
So I would say first, let me preface the fact, as I said, I am an art major. I am an artist. I am a creative. I want to put that out there first and foremost. With that said, I do like to appreciate the fact that I am always trying to be an early adopter of anything that happens. I like to think of myself as a futurist. I can kind of predict directions things are going. I saw on the horizon 18 months ago about that the prevalence of AI was just going to get more and more and happening and more and more and more. And I am in a lot of chat groups with a lot of artists. Artists are freaking out over AI, especially with the idea that it's going to replace them. What I've been able to do is, I wouldn't say an evangelist of AI, but understanding its potential and making our lives easier. My question to all of you is, how do you see using AI to make our job as podcasters easier? And I can tell you what I use it for me personally, is when I'm finished producing my podcast. So what you want to do is utilizing AI for the administrative tasks that suck up your creativity. Instead of doing that, like, give me 15 great hashtags. Utilizing it as an administrative assistant and not necessarily replacing the creative aspects of podcasting. And I can say I had one author, she was an Australian author, and I asked her 18 months ago, I said, are you worried about AI replacing people making books based off of AI? And she said something pretty poignant that I still remind people today, is she says, AI will never write a great novel. AI will always write a mediocre novel. There's a finite room in the world for mediocre work, but there is infinite amount of room for great works of art. And so I think about that when it comes down to that. I just wanted to open it up to everyone else, how you will be using AI if you haven't already. What are how you'll be using it in the future?
I use AI all the time in my productions. Everything from pre-productions to post-production to social media and all that stuff. So obviously I use Descript to record, and then Descript has multiple functions like multiple camera switching by itself, edit for clarity, immediately like filler words and everything just get out. I will use AI to look for clips if I don't have any clips that I already know I want, and then I just use AI for writing show notes for social media. And I even use AI, sometimes use AI to write pitch letter before I change it the way I want to. I just drop out a pitch letter. And then the way I usually use it to write pitch letter is I don't just say, hey, ChatGPT or Grok, write me a pitch letter. I always say, like, I want to pitch this person for the James Altucher show, but before you write the pitch letter, please ask me 5 questions or 10 questions before you draft it. So if I ask a couple questions, and then I will respond to it, so it's more personalized that way. And then obviously I use AI for cleaning up the noises as well. I use lots of DX Revive Pro, or sometimes I use the podcast, Adobe, the podcast Enhance, and I use Descript Studio Sound sometimes. And I don't know, have you guys heard of Google Notebook LM?
No.
That was great because sometimes I would just, let's say I want to research someone about their book. I would just put their book transcript or whatever PDF into the Notebook LM. And then what they do is they can make it into a podcast episodes, like 2 persons talking. So sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I can ask the questions that person has asked or the AI has asked when they're doing this audio version of the book. But yeah, this is generally how I use AI. I can't live a day without AI.
I never thought to use AI for a pitch. That's a great idea. And I also never thought, I get pitched by authors all the time sending me PDF copies of their books. I never thought to put that into AI and be like, hey, what are the best questions to ask out of this? Those are great tips. I love that.
I use AI for a couple of different things. I use it whenever I need something organized, right? So if I have huge lists or something like that, I will say, give me a chronological flow, or give me an extrapolated flow, or give me a Venn diagram among all of these different ideas, so that I don't have to do all of that kind of organizational work. The creativity, again, is I always wanted to stay mine. Thank you very much. But also, I write a lot of proposals. I have it write proposals for me, like in the style that the federal government wants to see, or the state government wants to see, or that this kind of company wants to see. Because frankly, I am not interested in spending my time writing proposals at all. In fact, if I never saw another proposal again, it would be entirely too soon. The same goes for accounting. The same goes for bookkeeping. So a really actually accurate accounting or bookkeeping AI would be fabulous. I don't trust them yet. But for anything that is going to be something like, I need to write this proposal, or I need to create a pitch deck, and I need you to tell me what the organizational flow should be for this pitch deck, is a beautiful way to use this. So for example, if you've got a podcast and you're interested in finding sponsors, if you need a pitch deck to get sponsors for your show, that's a really easy way to use AI. Make sure you know who you're going to be pitching, and then have it create the sort of the skeleton that you will then make your own, and also have it be something that will fit what the potential sponsor needs. And they do a really nice job. I mean, you're going to have to go through and design it, although I'm sure that there's an AI out there that will design it for you. But as far as the actual words of what the pitch needs to be so that the potential sponsor will be enticed by it, that's a beautiful way to use it, because it's not particularly creative. And I always I'm an artist. I want creativity to be mine. But the nuts and bolts stuff of like, how do you create the pitch deck, set up the pitch deck so that the sponsor would go, ooh, I want to talk to you and sponsor your show for 4 episodes or 8 episodes or whatever. It's a beautiful way to do it.
Now I know exactly how I want to approaching sponsors. So thanks, Izolda.
Yeah, let me know if you need any help with that. I'm in the midst of the nuts and bolts of it, and it's starting to pay off. So yeah, it's been really helpful.
There's so many out there, to be perfectly honest. I've used Perplexity myself. I've been designing a game in the back end just for fun, just to learn Unreal Engine, and I've been using it to kind of understand game development, filter through the YouTube cluster. But I'm also trying to learn Unreal for film and TV development, for 3D design and things like that. But I think if I don't know a topic or a subject, what we used to do besides going to libraries back in the day, those that are old enough, we used to Google everything, or we used to look at thesauruses or encyclopedias or whatever. But now AI has given us that capability of seeing content that is from all over the world. It's just another search engine is really all it boils down to. It just kind of destroys the planet.
I will say one of the things that I love, and again, I live in New York City, so I have access to the world's greatest libraries, but make use of your librarians. They have access to AI and databases that the regular general public doesn't. So often, if you go work with a librarian and you can do one-on-one, you can do one-on-one online, one-on-one personally, and they will get you access to some of these AIs, some of these databases that you can then do research on that you cannot as a private citizen. So use your libraries. They are fabulous.
Tagging on to that, the library like a mile and a half from my house has a Roadcaster, 4K cameras, and you can reserve up to 2 hours a day for free. So I like literally stopped paying for studio rentals. If you already know how to use the gear, use your library.
Yeah, that's actually being at the library, just as a quick tangent, is now one of my questions that I ask people about authors or people that I say, so where can people find their book? And like, you can get it on Amazon. And I would always say, or you can ask your local library to have it carry it for you. Not only promoting them having a library buy their book, you also are promoting people to go and utilize the library.
Just want to add a little bit on the AI, watch AI too are out there. I know, everyone obviously use ChatGPT or Cloud Ape. From what I heard, the new X Grok, it's actually pretty powerful. I've seen people build like just a web game of Groks, not as powerful as Unreal Engine, obviously, but I heard they are pretty good.
Just in general with the AI, a very short answer. If I need to, it's a time saver for me. So if I'm already going through and editing for the sound, is this the right camera angle, everything like that, in the background, if you can give me 4 or 5 30-second clips I can throw on my reels, excellent. That's less work I have to go through going and notating what the time is that I want to cut and all that stuff. So anytime it's a time saver for me, I love using it. So that's just my simple answer there.
Real quick before we wrap up here, thanks so much for everyone's time here. I found a plugin through Reddit actually, where this developer I think he's out of Chicago, is trying to put together a podcaster type setup for video podcasts that not only filter through different camera angles, but also cuts the audio tracks at the same time so that you separate the people in terms of how it goes. I wish I remember the name of it, but I'll have to check back on my email and I'll let everyone know about that. But I think it's an interesting concept where the faster we can edit a show, the faster we can get our content out there, the better it is, the easier it is for ourselves in terms of promotion, in terms of the next guest. It's our peace of mind is what it boils down to. So if you're spending 6 hours manually editing this stuff and something can do it, cut it down to 1, I'm all for it. So I'd love to chat with everyone about their workflows another time, especially you, Jay, when it comes to what you're specifically doing, because you've just triggered a whole key point that I want to just dive into head first with you on that one there. We're well over time. I apologize for that. I would just want to wrap up the show saying thank you, everyone, for being on the show. This has been a truly amazing experience. The question then is, who is going to host the next one?
I'll do it. I'll host it. The only thing is, I will need to figure out how to do video because my show is an audio only show. So I'll have to figure out all that streaming stuff. And then the next question is, when would we be doing this? That's something else for us to put in our brains and think about. Yeah, this is fabulous. Thank you so much, Kurt.
Oh,
Thank you. You did an excellent job, Kurt, with promotion and coming up with the questions and keeping it all going.
This was something that, Reena, if it wasn't for you saying, hey, when are we going to do this? I probably wouldn't have done it. So this goes back to your energetic personality that we all know and love when it comes to pushing us to actually do something that we haven't done in a while. So I appreciate that.
Just one piece of advice for everyone, the podcaster or everyone here, just about the Spotify for Creator. First, claim your RS feed on Spotify for Creator. Claim your show on there. And the other thing that I just realized a lot of people doesn't really know this is if you upload the video version of your show onto Spotify, they will tend to push more of your show onto either their front page or related podcaster because they are trying to get people to use that video function as much as possible.
Good
I
tip.
have my marching orders.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's do one final wrap up. Where can we find everyone? A quick outro, and I will end the stream. Thank you so much for everyone for being here.
Reena from the Better Call Daddy show. You can find me at bettercalldaddy.com or Reena Friedman Watts on all social.
And Kurt, you said we didn't have to do our outro because I didn't have one. So,
Just
but you
do a
can
quick
find, you can find me at storycomic.com. That's where all of my stuff is. You can always look story comic, one word. If you look at for story and comic, you're going to get thousands of hits, but there's only one hit if you do story comic. So right there, yeah.
And what was your name again?
Barney Smith at
Thank you.
storycomic.com. Yes, there we go.
I'm Izolda Trakhtenberg, and my show is called the Your Creative Mind podcast, and you can find the show pretty much everywhere. I am Izolda T pretty much everywhere, although mostly on Blue Sky now. And the podcast website is izoldat.com/podcast main page.
If you're looking for the Mikey on Mute podcast, we are on Spotify, YouTube. The easiest way is to go to my Instagram page. The spaces are underscores, but it's Mikey on Mute podcast. Go to the Instagram. My link tree's in there. You can get to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, everything else. My TikTok, all of the socials are on there. But yeah, find me on Instagram.
I'm very easy. So I'm a producer for the James Altucher Show. You can find the James Altucher Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or everything. And then in terms of my own stuff, you can find me on LinkedIn, J Yao, or on Instagram is J_Yao, YOW07, Twitter or X or Instagram. I'm mainly active on there because I post a lot of stuff on there. But yeah, if you have any questions on tech stuff, feel free to reach out to me.
Versus the Stars podcast, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Megaphone, and iHeartRadio. A lot of places. So it's Versus the Stars podcast. Come find me on social media, Instagram, Blue Sky, everywhere. I've hoarded myself on so many social medias at this point. It doesn't really just find me somewhere.
I'm Kurt Sasso, the host of Two Geeks Talking. You, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find at Two Geeks Talking. That's TWO, not the number 2. Please don't go to that website. It's TWO.podbean.com, or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking. And thank you, everyone, for being on the show. And I can't wait for the next roundtable session of this amazing crew that we have gathered here today.